Sup, and welcome to a random review. And a few videos ago on a random review, I checked out 𝗔 𝗥𝗻𝗃𝗄 the 𝗔 scandal. And while I was looking up information about 𝗔 𝗥𝗃𝗃𝗄, I caught an ad for another documentary about a game show contestant, which is kind of what happened when I reviewed Dune, and in the process of making that video, I caught an ad for Jodorowsky's Dune. And I had never heard of this documentary, which is called Perfect Bid, The Contestant Who Knew Too Much. The only thing I was certain of was that it had to have been about The Price is Right, because The Price is Right has these very distinct podiums, and you can see one of those podiums on the film's cover art. So, on a whim, I was like, you know what, why not, I'll give this a shot. Because I enjoyed 𝗔 𝗥𝗃𝗃𝗄, and for all I knew, Perfect Bid could have been even better, could have been about an even crazier game show scandal. So, I sat down and watched this documentary, which was released in 2017 and was directed by C.J. Wallace. This documentary is about a former middle school math teacher named Ted Slauson, who was really into The Price is Right, which is a classic American game show, in case you don't know. And Slauson was so invested in The Price is Right that he started to memorize and catalog the prices of the items that were featured in the show, because the objective in The Price is Right is to guess how much things are worth. And so he started appearing at tapings of the show in the crowd, and he became recognized for a bit for always shouting out exactly how much things cost. And after a while, it led to him getting picked as a contestant on the show itself. And so the documentary is about him and his relationship to the show. So I started watching this, and right away, within a few minutes, I knew that I was in trouble with this documentary, because it cut to an interview with the longtime producer of The Price is Right, whose name was Roger Dobkowitz. And when Dobkowitz spoke, his audio was terrible. There was an echo, and it didn't sound like he was properly mic'd. And when I heard that, I went, uh-oh. Because professional documentaries are supposed to sound better than this.
For the showcase, the reveal of the showcase, we actually taped calculators to the readout machines.
So that's weird, but it gets weirder, because in Perfect Bid, there are 3 and only 3 people that you hear from in original interviews. You hear from Ted Slauson, Roger Dobkowitz, and Bob Barker, the original host of The Price is Right. But whenever you hear from Dobkowitz and Barker, what they're saying has absolutely nothing to do with Ted Slauson. The documentary cuts back to them over and over again, and yet neither of them ever actually talk about the guy that this documentary is about, which is bewildering, because every time you hear from them, it feels as though you're listening to someone from a completely different film, even though, again, these were original interviews in which I guess they decided not to ask these people about the subject of the documentary. It's very odd, but it continues, because there's a narrator in this documentary, but you hear him so infrequently, they go like 20 minutes between talking, that it comes off as random when they talk, especially because the narrator is doing an impression of an old-time newsreel host when they speak, which again is really weird. Then there's the music. Throughout the documentary, you're hearing big band music and classic public domain music when people are talking, and it's totally distracting because it doesn't fit with the subject matter at all. This documentary is about a guy who went on The Price is Right in the 1990s. So you'd think that the background music would either be standard production music or 90s music. And yet, what you hear is this big band music from like the 1940s, which feels incredibly out of place. And that's doubly true for the classic music, because you'll hear things like Habanera from Carmen and Hall of the Mountain King during these interview segments about The Price is Right, and it doesn't mesh at all. And what makes it worse is that the music disappears all the time. You'll be listening to this loud type music, and then it'll just go away, and you won't hear any music at all for like 10 minutes, and then it'll just come back again. It's like they hadn't finished editing the movie and putting in the music in all the right spots when this was released. This is one of the most scattershot, poorly assembled documentaries I've ever seen. It looks cheap, it sounds cheap, and I found this incredibly distracting. But what makes it worse is the subject matter himself, because the overwhelming majority of Perfect Bid is spent listening to Ted Slauson recount how he got on The Price is Right and what he did on it. And Ted Slauson, he comes off as a fairly well-adjusted person outside of his obsession with The Price is Right. He mentions that he's got a partner, that he's got friends, he has a stable job, yada yada yada. And all of that is cool and everything, except that he is boring as hell to listen to. Slauson exhibits all the charisma of a middle school math teacher, and he drones on and on and on about the most minute, specific, irrelevant details of his experience with The Price is Right, and unfortunately, none of it is edited out for some reason. If you watch this, you'll have to listen to him go off on these tangents that categorically do not deserve to be in the documentary. Like this one, for instance.
In the summer of 1990, July 4th fell on a Wednesday, and Price is Right used to tape on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays. And so I called the show, or called CBS. No, we're not taping on the 4th. We're taping on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and hung up. I better call back and make sure. So I called back, and I said, are you taping on Sunday, July 1st? And they said, yes, we are. And I said, great.
Learning why he chose a certain day to show up to a taping is not interesting. No one cares. And so much of what he says is not interesting. And yet it's kept in anyway. At one point, he recounts when he got on the stage in front of this big wheel on The Price is Right that you're supposed to spin. And he goes, so there was a small circular carpet in front of the wheel, and the production crew cleans the carpet every day, and they had actually just put it down on the floor. So when I went to spin the wheel, I was the first person that day who got to step on that carpet. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I don't care. None of this matters. Get to the part that matters. This documentary is 70 minutes long, and there is so much nonsense in it that it isn't until halfway through that we finally see Slauson get on The Price is Right as a contestant. The first half of this is so drawn out and so uninteresting that I was legitimately upset watching it, because it still hadn't gotten to its damn focal point 30 minutes in. It still hadn't given me a reason to care about this guy. But finally, 30 minutes in, Ted Slauson gets on the damn show. And one of the reasons why he gets on the show is because there was a beauty model on the show named Holly Hallstrom, and Slauson came to the taping that day wearing a shirt that said, "I'm here to kiss Holly." And it's a sign of the times, because apparently people found this shirt so delightful that it was attributed as one of the reasons why he got picked to go on the show. Whereas I look at this shirt and I go, ugh, because it's cringy as hell. Like, imagine being a woman and some random dude shows up to your workplace wearing a shirt that says, "I'm here to kiss you." Not even, "I want to kiss you." I'm here to kiss you. It's creepy. But anyway, because it was the 1990s and things were different back then, he gets on the show. And by this point, I was not particularly invested in his success. I didn't really care what happened to him. But I needed to know what the hell he did on the show, because the documentary is called The Contestant Who Knew Too Much. And because it had been established that he knew the exact prices of all of these items, I had conjured up this scenario in my head that Slauson was going to get on the show and use his knowledge to win like $1 million or something, and that it would be like a giant scandal, and that Bob Barker would be like, "I hate you, go away," or whatever. I very much went into this thinking that it was going to play out like Michael Larson's appearance on Press Your Luck. It's why I kept watching this. Otherwise, I would have abandoned this way earlier. So, Slauson gets on. He gets through the first stage of the show. He wins a recliner and a laminator. He gets to the second stage, which involves the big wheel. And he loses. And that was it. He was off the show at that point. And he never competed as a contestant ever again. And when it sank in that that was as far as he went, I was seething. I was like, "You've got to be kidding me. You're telling me that I've been listening to this dude ramble for 40 minutes, and all he did, after all that buildup, all he did on The Price is Right is win a chair and a laminator? That's what this is all about? What?" And then I looked at the timestamp, and there were still 30 minutes left, and I was like, what the fuck are they going to spend the next 30 minutes on? And sure enough, the documentary immediately goes off on a 5-minute tangent about Bob Barker and Roger Dobkowitz's retirements from the show, which again had nothing to do with Ted Slauson. And even when they cut back to Slauson, he just rambles about The Price is Right again. So it gets to the point where I was just ready for this to be over with. If I wasn't a completionist, I would have stopped watching this at this point, because this was a chore to sit through. But I sat through it out of a sunk cost obligation. The documentary gets to the 1 hour mark, and at this point there's only 10 minutes left. And in the final 10 minutes, all of a sudden, the documentary is like, "Oh yeah, by the way, Ted Slauson is responsible for the only perfect showcase bid in the history of The Price is Right, because Slauson went to another taping of the show a decade and a half later and helped someone else place an exact bid on a showcase item which had never happened before. And the guy who placed that bid refused to acknowledge that Ted Slauson was the person who gave him that total, and that this actually was a scandal because the people running the show thought there had been shenanigans because no one had ever gotten a perfect showcase bid on the show before. And I watched those last 10 minutes and I was baffled because, as it turned out, there actually was something interesting that came of Ted Slauson's obsession with The Price is Right, and yet for some reason, the documentary only covers it for 10 minutes, and it blew my mind because that is what this documentary should have been about. The fact that the guy who placed the only perfect bid in that show's history was this fraud and liar who refused to thank the person who gave him the bid, let alone compensate him for it or acknowledge that he did it, that's interesting. And yet, 90% of the documentary's runtime is spent on the prelude to this, which is not interesting. It's so bizarre. I have never seen a documentary in my life that focuses less on what it's supposed to be about, less on what its literal title is, than this. In summation, I hated almost every minute of this. This is one of those documentaries that you watch where you go, man, this could have been 5 minutes long. This could have been a 5-minute news piece. This did not deserve to be 70 minutes long. Perfect Bid is boring. It sounds terrible. It looks terrible. It's edited horribly. There are long segments in it that have nothing to do with its premise. And when I was done watching Perfect Bid, I went online to see what critics had thought about this documentary because I was curious. And as it turns out, most critics liked this when it came out, which just goes to show that people are different because, boy, unless you are a gigantic fan of The Price is Right, I couldn't possibly recommend this to anyone. It's barely an hour long, and I still wish I had never seen it. In fact, I was actually on the fence about reviewing this at all because I normally don't review things that I dislike this much, but I had to make an exception here, if only to justify the time that I spent watching this. So, I give Perfect Bid, the contestant who knew too much, a perfect 2.4 out of 10. It's a total waste of time. It's one of the worst documentaries I've ever seen that wasn't also, like, propaganda for nefarious people or something. Don't watch it! Or do. It's your life, but don't say I didn't warn you.